The views expressed are solely those of the speaker and not necessarily those of Paltalk.com, AVM Software, or its advertisers.
News Talk is online. News Talk Online is a production of Paltalk.com, the largest multimedia interactive program on the internet with more than 4 million unique users on demand on iTunes and on YouTube and on my blog, GaryBaumgarten.com, where you're encouraged to post your comments, whether you agree with yours truly or not. No retribution. And where you are also encouraged to subscribe to my Twitter feed, twitter.com/GaryBaumgarten, so you can be an informed chatter on Paltalk and in your real life out there in the real world. And thanks to our good friends at CRN Digital Talk Radio, we're syndicated to an additional 12 million households. I am your host, Gary Baumgarten. I welcome you to the show. Well, we have some good news and some bad news coming from Iran today. The good news is that they've released 5 journalists. The bad news is that there are 36 journalists who remain in jail, which means that Iran has the dubious honor of having incarcerated more journalists than any other nation in the world. We all know why they're doing this, ladies and gentlemen. They don't want the truth to come out about what's going on in the streets of Iran today. God forbid the world should know the reality. Well, you know, it has a way of rising to the surface. We're still finding out pretty much what's going on in Iran. We have accredited journalists and we have citizen journalists who are putting their lives on the line every single day to get us the information that we need to know what's going on so that we can influence our respective leaders of our governments to do the right thing with regard to Iran. Joining us here to talk about the situation in Iran, where they routinely take people who are critical of the regime and throw them in the Huskow, is Mohamed Abdel Dayem. I think I'm pronouncing your name right from our earlier conversation. A coordinator with the Committee to Protect Journalists who specializes in the Middle East and North Africa. Mohamed, welcome to News Talk Online on Paltalk.com.
Thank you for having me, Gary.
It's great having you with us, sir, and I thank your organization for its terrific work in getting out the word about how dangerous it is to be a journalist these days. Here in the United States, sometimes people get locked up because the cops don't want them taking pictures for their local newspaper or video for their television stations. I myself have been thrown in the backseat of a police car doing my job, but never have I ever feared for my life or feared that I would be held incommunicado for long periods of time because the government here didn't like what I was saying about them. But it's a real risky business being a journalist these days in Iran, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. That sadly, I have to agree with you. Iran has always been a dangerous place to be a journalist, and since the disputed elections that took place on June 12th of this year, it's become an even nastier place to be a journalist. This description holds both for local Iranian journalists as well as international journalists working out of Iran. This holds for bloggers, for newspaper journalists, for radio and TV journalists, for photographers, even for other media workers that are not that are involved in the production of news, though are not necessarily journalists themselves. Cameramen and sound engineers and makeup people and all kinds of other people that you need in order to produce a newscast.
Well, when you have a regime that blames all of its woes on the BBC, you're going to find, I'm sure, that Iranians who work for that organization, for example, are in particular harm's way. And we already know, and it's a matter of public record, even in a country where very little does go on the public record, that journalists who represent opposition media in Iran routinely get arrested and are routinely placed incommunicado without benefit of counsel, without word to the outside world or from the outside world. Happens all the time in that country.
It does, unfortunately. And just to make a quick distinction here, this is not a problem of deficiencies in the Iranian laws, although there are deficiencies in the Iranian law, and I'm happy to discuss that if that's something you or your listeners want to talk to. But what we're having a problem with at the moment is we have at least 36 journalists who are in Iranian jail, and the problem is they're not even being afforded the guarantees, the due process that is guaranteed to them by the Iranian constitution, by the Iranian press law, and by the Iranian penal code. So it's not even so much a comparison of the laws in Iran to the laws in the U.S. or any other country, and describing the Iranian laws as inferior, as guaranteeing less rights. At this point, we're simply asking the Iranians to enforce their own laws.
Mohammed, are the indigenous reporters at greater risk than those who are foreign correspondents? From what I can see, generally a foreign national who is working in Iran may face short arrest but ultimate deportation. We had the case of the freelance journalist who was reporting for NPR. They claimed her to be an Iranian national because her father is Iranian, even though she was born here in the United States. But there was pressure put on from the outside world, and they capitulated to that pressure ultimately, and she was released. But it seems to me that, and you could correct me if I'm wrong, the native Iranian journalists are the ones who are at most risk because there's nobody out here to advocate on their behalf.
Well, a few things. Let me point out a couple of things. First of all, thankfully we are here to advocate on behalf of all journalists, whether local Iranians, dual citizens like Roxana Saberi, who you just mentioned, who used to freelance for NPR and is now back in the United States, or a number of other journalists who are foreigners. So that's a good thing. The second point I want to make is there are 36 people incarcerated right now. Of those 36, 34 work for local media and 2 work for international media. So your initial perception that those who work for local media are at far higher risk is in fact corroborated by the raw numbers. Of the 2 that work for foreign media, one is an Iranian national and the second is a dual citizen of Iran and Canada. My last point of clarification that I want to make is, in the case of this dual citizen, Mr. Maziar Bahari, who reports for Newsweek magazine, as well as Roxana Saberi, who was incarcerated in Iran a number of months back, they are in fact Iranian citizens. Ms. Saberi does hold an Iranian passport alongside her American